getting that recorded. We are on Zoom, we are on Facebook, and as people hop in, we'll be able to check in. So we have a 20-day-old, super fresh. Congrats. Thanks for sharing. So to give you an overview, hey, from LA, 5 months. To give you an overview, we're going to be, first we'll just quickly introduce ourselves, and then we're going to kind of have a conversational format today. And there'll be a couple chances for you to keep utilizing the chat box. And then at the end, we're going to reserve some time for Q&A, letting us know if there are specifics from today's conversation that you want to go even deeper into. So thank you guys for sharing. We have 20 days, 5 months, 7 weeks, 3 weeks. So we're kind of all over the map, right? But all of you that are joining us are in this, I call it the double whammy season, where postpartum is a lot of change and it's lonely and it can be hard. And now you have a pandemic, right? That is challenging and lonely and hard. And so we just really want to honor your time in your space and say that you are not alone. Kaylee and I cannot take away all of the struggles of this time, unfortunately, but what we can do is support you and give you tools and even permission to support yourself. So I'm going to quickly share my screen just to give you guys an overview of who you are hanging out with today. And why we are here. And then we'll go into that kind of Q&A format. All right, so you guys, I am Chelsea, and I am a postpartum coach. I am the founder of Postpartum Together, which is an organization that strives to educate, support, normalize, and empower women in the postpartum season. So my goal, I like to help women kick the pressure to be Pinterest perfect and have real, raw conversations to acknowledge and empower the postpartum experience. So I focus on preparing women for postpartum and then providing small groups to bring postpartum women together between 3 and 10 months. And in these groups, we really learn about and connect over postpartum. So I also have gotten this name of the queen of taboo topics. So I like to go there and make space for you and help you learn how to self-advocate, rediscover connection and intimacy, and make things work for life with a new baby. And then Kaylee, I'm gonna let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, friends. It's really nice to be here. I thank you to Chelsea for kind of reaching out to me. So I am a licensed professional clinical mental health counselor, but I specialize in grief, and probably even more particular, I kind of specialize in, and we'll get into this a little bit, in what I call disenfranchised grief. So that's grief that sometimes goes above and beyond death loss. So I do work a lot with individuals who have experienced a death loss, but I work with a wide range of individuals who are navigating life transitions, chronic illness. So that is a little bit about me. I am really just happy to be here, and kind of like Chelsea, one of my main goals and all the work I do is just to kind of hopefully create a safe space just to have conversations that might be uncomfortable or just kind of difficult. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're gonna kind of have some Q&A available between Kaylee and I, and then again, if you guys have questions that you want to bring up, if one of the things that we say or there's something that's on your mind, put them in the chat box. You can send it to everyone, or you can do a DM via the chat to myself or Kaylee, and we will make sure to bring them up as we are chatting today. So, okay, Kaylee, I just heard you use this term of disenfranchised grief and talking about grief separate from death loss, which is kind of a different concept than what a lot of us are used to. Can you talk a little bit more about what grief is when it's not related to death loss?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of us only maybe associate grief with And that's certainly, I think, a big component of grief. But I honestly, in the work as a therapist, I'm kind of fond of saying that anybody that I interact with as a therapist is dealing with grief in some way, shape, or form. So I think, again, as I mentioned, I think we make the misconception that transitions, even when they're happy things like, weddings or having a baby, we sometimes make the assumption that there's not going to be grief involved with that. But I think any transition is kind of full of those kind of paradoxical emotions. And so sometimes I think it's hard, though, to find that permission to allow yourself to acknowledge that there may be grief components. So yeah, I love this term of disenfranchised grief. It's a term that was coined back in the 1980s, actually, by a psychologist. And he really kind of was basing it on his own work and his own work with clients. And he found that there's a lot of things that we grieve as human beings, not just related to death.
Yeah. Okay. So I hear the word grief, right? And I think about an emotion of sadness, I guess, is the biggest thing that I can think of. So what could grief, how would you know that you're experiencing grief? What could this look like or feel like as a human?
Absolutely. And I think it's really normal. Sometimes we associate grief just as tearfulness. But grief has many shapes and sizes. And I also want to be very clear that no two people grieve in the same way. So, I have people that will say to me, Kaylee, I have not cried over X, Y, or Z. Is that normal? Or some people will say, like, I can't stop crying. Is that normal? So grief is as unique as we are as a person. So it can definitely manifest itself in emotions for sure. But often, sometimes we may even have physiological responses to grief. We may have an increase in headaches, stomach pain. Our bodies grieve too. And so I say that to my clients a lot, that it's, I think, a mistake to just say that grief affects us emotionally, because I don't think there's any facet of our beings that isn't affected by grief. And so I think fatigue is another really big one. And that, I think, in particular, transitioning into motherhood, I think that's a huge thing. So there's really not an area that isn't impacted.
Yeah. Okay. So that is good to know and to hear. I like that you say like our bodies grieve too. I think that's a really powerful statement. Yes. And so we have this culture, as we kind of talk specifically about birth and postpartum, we have this culture that has a lot of arbitrary timelines that we give people. And specifically, we're going to talk today about these timelines we give women and we give birthing humans, right? So I hear from my clients a lot, like, I should be over this by now. Or, my birth was 8 months ago. Why? I should be over this. And I think we are told in so many ways, like, I should blank by blank. And this is a common thing we use to judge our own progress, to judge our, I don't know if this is a word, but like our goodness in a lot of different spaces. And I hear this from moms about their bodies, about their emotional state, about, their friendships, their relationship. And I hear this, when it comes to grief, I should be over it by now. Can you share a little bit about the timeline of grief and whether these kind of arbitrary milestones that we set for ourselves are even helpful?
Yeah. So, when a lot of times when I do trainings and workshops, people, when they think about grief, they kind of think of Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And I'm here to tell you that even Dr. Kubler-Ross did not believe grief followed a nice, neat, tidy, linear progression. She actually, at the end of her life, kind of was fond of saying that was almost a really painful part for her, is that her work kind of was misappropriated in that way. And I think it is hard because it creates shoulds, right? Well, okay, maybe I should be in this stage of grief and I'm not. So am I doing grief wrong, or am I doing this process in a way that's not healthy? I think there is no timeline to grief, and I know that sometimes is unhelpful when I say that, but what I mean by that is allowing yourself, kind of realizing that grief is not linear as much as it is kind of circular. You know?
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah. And so sometimes we experience good moments, right? And we're like, okay, feeling okay. And then we might have a day that's harder. And I always encourage my clients to not beat themselves up when that happens. Like, that doesn't mean you're failing at grief. So I think kind of freeing ourselves from feeling like we have to fit in those stages. One of my favorite quotes, and I apologize, I don't know who it's attributed to, but you know, asking when grief ends is like asking how high the sky is, right? Because it's different for everybody. It's different for every single person. And so I like to joke that I wish I had a calendar and I could say, okay, on this day, you know, you've crossed off the the stages, you're good, you're not going to be grieving anymore. But unfortunately, just personally and professionally, that's just not the way that grief operates. And yet, as you've mentioned, Chelsea, I think we very much live in a culture that is very efficiency minded. And so I think we have a lot of timelines that we put on ourselves, but also external pressure to get back to normal.
Right. I definitely agree. And this is something, like I said, a reoccurring theme that I hear with my mamas. I heard this before COVID, and now it's, you know, we have these extra layers in COVID. So let's talk specifically about this in the birth world, right? I hear a lot of things that impact moms that they are carrying with them even months later. I want to give you guys that are watching at this point a chance to use the chat box and let us know some of these things that you're feeling has impacted your journey, and maybe you are looking to make room, give yourself permission to grieve. Kaylee, we had some examples here. Talking about, so also there's birth plans, right?
Right.
That don't go as expected.
And I think a lot too, and I know, Chelsea, you probably talk to your clients a lot about this, but just the importance of support, you know, through this birth process. And I think COVID has really impacted just that ability to have your people with you, even during birth itself, you know. And I know every hospital was a little bit different, but I've definitely had, you know, clients and new moms share with me how hard that was to feel like, you know, they expected to be able to have their people surrounding them, which is so important in birth, and then that wasn't able to happen during, you know, COVID. And then support afterwards. I mean, I think everything right now with COVID is tinged with anxiety. Is this safe? Is this not safe? You want to keep your baby healthy and safe. And so, you know, who can you let in the house to help? I mean, there's a lot of, I think, additional layers of anxiety, which is already there. It is totally normal to be there. And so I think a lot of things get exacerbated and amplified during this time, unfortunately.
Yeah, and to build on that, I see what Rachel was sharing, the loss of relationships, right? So, you know, Keely, you hit on this, not having maybe people in your birthing room. Like, I have heard mamas give birth without their partner in the room, or, you know, they had their mom or a doula or someone ready to be their advocate and their support person, and that wasn't possible. So we see this like immediate impact in birth. Then I think something that we're all experiencing, and yet our new mamas are feeling even heavier, is this, like, we're not able to see our people as much, and we are connected people, right? So there are some relationships, there are some friendships, maybe even familial relationships that aren't as strong right now because of this, I mean, because of so many things right now, but because of this distance. And, you know, we have grandparents or cousins or friends who aren't able to meet the baby. And even those of us who are really well-intentioned, relationships are really shifting right now. And what we know about new moms is that this is a time when we need connection, we need support, we need to know that on these dark days that we're awake in the middle of the night and we're exhausted and the dishes are piled up and it feels like there is no end, that there are people on our support team. So I guess, Kaylee, this specifically makes me think about, how do you deal with grief of relationship and just like honestly human connection?
Absolutely. And I talk a lot about what I call secondary losses. And so, you know, obviously when we're talking about grieving during COVID, I mean, COVID is kind of that primary loss, but we have these ripple effects of secondary losses. And I think it's important to allow ourselves to acknowledge those. And sometimes it can be even helpful just to name those in whatever way feels comfortable to you, whether that's writing those out or just kind of sitting and kind of, again, giving yourself that self-compassion to realize, like, this is a lot and it's a big transition, my goodness, in and of itself. But again, you're adding these layers on top during COVID that I think are just, they're really heavy. And Chelsea, you're so right. We are relational beings and we need that connection. And so when we're not able to have that, that contributes to feeling even more isolated. And so I think just allowing yourselves, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more, but giving yourself a permission to grieve that. Like, it's okay to label it as that, and it's okay to express all of the emotions, whether that's sadness, anger, confusion, feeling worried. Like, you know, I think about that too. I think all of us are really navigating, okay, is this activity safe? Is it not safe? Keeping your baby safe? I mean, there's a lot going on.
Right. Yeah. And I'm going to name a couple of the other things that we had discussed.
Absolutely.
You know, and some of you watching, I'd love to hear if these resonate with you. We talked about like a traumatic birth experience, which might be birthing with a mask without your partner. It might be that the hospital just felt like such a sterile, distant place. I've heard from moms. It could be, you know, that there was some kind of rushed intervention that may or may not happen with COVID, but it just felt, you know, like you're out of control, which was a huge grief factor for me when I feel like something is happening to me and I'm not a part of this experience. We also talked about just legitimizing the, like you just said, that significant transition in to motherhood, which we see because, you know, we're not having visitors that are affirming this change. We maybe, like, some of my moms aren't even having a checkup postpartum, which is a whole nother, you know, soapbox for me. But it's almost saying to our moms, like, well, you birthed this baby, good luck, here you go. Like, we're not seeing a lot of validation as this huge transition happened. And then, you know, another one that I hear, again, pre-COVID and now, is this loss of identity. Do you have anything you want to go into with those factors?
Yeah, I mean, I think, all of those, like you said, Chelsea, were prevalent during COVID. And I think that grieving the prior identity is a huge thing. You know, who am I as a woman after, you know, birth? And, you know, I will share, I struggle with fertility issues. And so, you know, who am I as a woman who can't have kids? You know, and so just that wrestling of, who am I as a woman? Who am I? And I know you talk about this a lot, Chelsea. Who am I as a sexual being? You know, can I be sexual and a mom? Can I be, I mean, all of those things. So again, just creating space and allowing yourself to name those and to kind of, we talked about disenfranchised grief. So maybe even asking yourself, what would it look like to enfranchise, you know, my grief in this process? And what would that look like for you? And I think it's different for every woman, you know, but allowing yourself to ask that question, you know, what would I need to enfranchise myself through this process?
Okay, so this is a great transition, Kaylee,
Yeah.
because you're going to take us through
Yeah.
some practices and give us some ideas for the moms watching, for the moms on the recording. How do we take this and work through grief for ourselves, and also knowing that as each individual gives permission for this space, we're also kind of taking away the taboo of grief for everyone. What does this look like on a personal and a bigger picture level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge because when you give yourself permission to experience all of those emotions, you're giving other people. I always say vulnerability begets vulnerability. And so it does, you kind of chinks away at these taboo topics when we allow ourselves to identify that it's hard. You know, this is a really simple, maybe even a little cliche little practice that I encourage really all of my clients to do is kind of create a little ritual of affirmation. As a grief therapist and as a thanatologist who studies death and dying, I'm very interested in ritual. And I think other cultures, both in the birthing process and the transition out of this world, have a lot more rituals surrounding these transitions than sometimes we do in Western culture. But I always encourage people just to create a simple ritual of affirmation. So that can be as simple as writing down like a little mantra to remind yourself that you are doing the best you can. In fact, the mantra I repeat every day going into my counseling day is forgive yourself for forgetting you are doing the best you can. So just even, again, whatever works for you. Maybe even just, this may sound silly too, but lighting a candle and just having some soothing music. I know schedules are crazy and it's busy and it's hard to find time to do some of these things. So they don't have to be long or extensive either. Just a little mantra that you can repeat daily, or lighting a candle and repeating that mantra just to kind of set your mind on that self-compassion piece. I think support is huge. I know it's really hard right now, but you know, and whether that is informal support where you can, you know, dialogue with other new moms who have maybe birthed during COVID in particular, that can be really helpful. And I was even thinking, you know, technology is kind of a double-edged sword sometimes, but we do have the capacity to kind of, you know, reach out to one another, you know, via Facebook or, you know, Marco Polo or Instagram. So some of those informal types of support. And then there's no shame also in seeking professional support. Sometimes I think there's a misconception, you know, if somebody says, I think you should see a therapist, sometimes there's like, oh crap, what's wrong with me? But really, you know, so that's not what I mean by that. But I think just maybe having a non-biased third party, you know, professional that can, again, help you create space for yourself. And so I know a lot of therapists right now are offering telehealth services, which is nice. And so that, you know, if you're a little bit anxious about maybe going into a counseling office, that's even nice too, because you can do it from the comfy space of your home. A lot of my clients are doing that right now, and they actually are like, it's kind of nice. No one knows that I'm going into a counseling office. So, you know, there's no shame in reaching out for that professional support too.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like this idea of having some kind of ritual. And I love what you shared. I find for me and some of my clients, like just getting it out can be so helpful. And it's really figuring out what is your expression, right? So this might be, you know, journaling the entire experience and then highlighting, you know, maybe you go back through and you highlight the words with a color that matches the feeling with it. Or maybe you have, you know, a sentence in a circle and you make a web of all the parts of that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, maybe for you, it's some kind of other body expression. Maybe it's dance, or I used to be a an instructor for a fitness program called Pound, which is very
Mhm.
much what it sounds like. Like you take sticks and you beat the floor.
Yeah.
But I found, and you can find some of those routines on YouTube, but I found it really therapeutic to almost like
Yes.
name the experience and remind myself like this has space and this doesn't define me. And there are so many ways, you know, physically, mentally, emotionally to get that out.
Absolutely.
And that it's not that there's one perfect way, it's getting it out, because when you don't get this grief out, it doesn't just go away. Like it absorbs into your body, and like you've said, it has physical and mental and emotional manifestations. So in this space, Kaylee and I really wanted to give you this permission, not that you need permission from us, but because sometimes we need that outside reminder, that outside permission to say, one, this is normal. Two, you deserve this. And three, like this is a beneficial thing, not just for you, but for your family, to take this time and space and energy to grieve. So I get pretty fiery about that. I think
I love the idea of using your body too. I think that's so important in grief because again, our bodies grieve. And so,
yeah.
you know, I work a lot with kids in grief, and one of the most profound things is just allowing them to get angry, and that's okay.
Yes.
And I think particularly too, as women, we've been very programmed sometimes that we're not supposed to be angry, or we're not supposed to, you know, express certain emotions. So yeah, I like what you said, Chelsea. It's not a one size fits all, and what may work for one woman might not for another person, and that's okay. Like, you know, for someone, you know, going to therapy may not be, you know, what is helpful to them, but for another woman that's immensely helpful. So again, there's no pressure to fit again into that mold of what grief should and does look like.
Yeah, so we're going to move into a different space, but I quickly wanted to add on to that I hear from a lot of women that taking this time and space for themselves feels selfish, whether it's journaling or activity or, you know, some kind of artistic, whatever it is. We feel like taking this time for ourselves is selfish. And I want to meet that with saying, like, again, it doesn't go away. And to be a better mom, to be a better partner, and I don't mean better in these like societal standards, I mean present and whole and healing. That is a very sacrificial work to do. And so it is important. Don't write it off because you feel like you're being selfish taking the time you need to grieve, or, you know, you're engaging this and it requires some intention. It is not selfish. It is healing. It is important. It is giving a more whole version of yourself to those around you, which is actually an incredible, incredible gift.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think sometimes when we think about self-care, I know even from my experience, it can sometimes feel like, oh, one more thing to add, you know, to the to-do list. So that's why I love to talk about self-compassion, which is really just the way we talk to ourselves. And, you know, the way, and even some of the words and language we use towards ourselves, we would never use towards, you know, another mom or another close friend, but we do to ourselves. And so even simply just stepping back and asking ourselves, like, would I really use that word, or would I call somebody else going through this an idiot or lazy or anything like that? And most of the time the answer is, of course I would, you know. So just monitoring and really just being aware of the dialogue we have with ourselves.
Yeah. So Kaylee, we have you have a practice, right? Or just kind of encouraging people to do something for themselves. And as we're moving into that, if you guys that are watching live have questions, now is a great time to put them into the chat box. We're going to try to wrap up in the next 10 or so minutes. And so if you have questions, again, hit them into the chat box and we'll get to them momentarily. Kaylee, what do you have for us that we can do right now?
Yeah, so in whatever way this looks like for you, giving yourself a permission to grieve. And so whether that's even writing out like a permission slip, like I give myself permission to grieve by ... Or even if you just want to have that conversation with a close friend or your partner, and just what that looks like for you. And again, it's going to look different for each person. But I think even using that language, I give myself permission to grieve, is hugely significant. Even if you need to like visually write it out and stick it somewhere, sometimes that's really helpful too, just so you can see it.
Great.
I think that could be maybe a helpful little intervention. I don't really like that word, but just a little practice, you know. And again, it doesn't have to take long. A lot of times I really try to suggest things that I know aren't going to take, you know, a lot of time and energy when we're already feeling like pretty empty. So again, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for some people, that's like a Post-it note, right? Which can go wherever you see it frequently. Maybe it's in the car. Like maybe the car is where you get some quiet thinking time. The baby is in the car seat. So you put on your dashboard or wherever, like, I give myself permission to grieve by blink, and you give yourself that time while you're driving instead of, you know, kind of numbing out to music, which I get can be great sometimes, but finding that, I like how you said, like, finding these routines, finding these rituals, finding the things that work for you. If you know, maybe you love something that's beautiful, so you can make something that looks really beautiful about this permission slip to grieve. But I think, we seek this validation, we seek this permission. And so Kaylee and I just kind of bestow this upon you and remind you that that is inside. You have that permission for yourself.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, absolutely. I did see somebody ask kind of about managing anxiety, and that's a really good question. Couple of things real quickly that come to my mind, and then obviously that would be a topic, you know, that we could delve into on another webinar at some point. But I think for me, one thing that's really helpful if I'm, you know, feeling anxious about something that has to do with like medical or physiological stuff is I actually ask my physician, you know, and ask, like, and write out questions and just say, like, you know, what are some practical things I can do to mitigate the risk of transmission, you know, of COVID? So actually, again, that's that validation thing. You're not a burden for reaching out to your doctor,
right,
asking those questions. You're not a burden for doing that. You know, and I also think just some basic little, and again, I could go on and on about this, but I think grounding exercises are really helpful. So one I love that's really quick and easy is actually just to activate your senses, which actually does reduce our anxiety. So what I say by that is just identifying 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can smell, 2 things, and you just go down all 5 senses. And really that just grounds you in that present moment. And you can Google, it's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game.
Yes, yeah.
It's super simple. I really do think it just kind of helps when we're feeling that escalation. And again, self-compassion and not beating yourself up for feeling anxious. That's a totally valid, I know it doesn't feel normal, but it's a totally valid emotional reaction to the world we're navigating right now. And I think you're already worried about new baby and keeping new baby safe, and then you have a pandemic, like a lot. So I don't know if those are just some real quick, you know, little suggestions, but I would just emphasize, like, you're not a burden for asking doctors questions. I think that's huge.
And I add to that, Kaylee, like I always tell my moms, like, if you feel like you asking a question is a burden for your provider, this is a good time to look for another provider.
That's a great point too.
Don't
yeah.
For that.
Yeah, you are allowed to advocate for yourself, and it's okay if you're like, you know what, I don't know that this doctor is a fit for me. Like, it's really a good practice of self-advocacy, just monitoring that. Like, are they listening? Are they really, you know, willing to talk and dialogue with me?
Yeah. That's great. Well, I don't see any other questions, so this is kind of like a last call, you guys. If you have anything else, have it in here. But, you know, and even if you're watching the recording, you have Kaylee and my information.
Yes, please feel like you can reach out. Absolutely.
Follow-up email, right? So, Kaylee, you take clients in Ohio.
I do.
Okay, so yes, she is a licensed therapist in Ohio. And I take clients from all over, I would say the US, but actually now, like, I've had clients across the world. So
that's amazing. Yeah.
So I take small group clients in one-on-one, for more of the coaching aspect than the therapeutic aspect.
And I will say, even though I can only offer counseling services in Ohio, I'm always available for anywhere to do webinars, workshops, those kinds of things. So, you know, if you have a group of, you know, your friends and you would like, you know, a workshop or a webinar on this topic, and we can even dig into some more of this, I'd be happy to do that. So feel free to email me.
That's great. All right, well, I'm going to close this up, and you guys know how to find us if you have any other questions. If you have friends that you think would love this, make sure that they maybe reach out to so that they can get a copy of the recording. And we thank you so much for being here. Thank you for stepping into this space and knowing that you deserve to be seen and to be heard. And we just send all of our energy of compassion and permission and care to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.